retirees.
When you're retired, if you stay in, you can get on these flights for
Free.
$12 for your box lunch. And they'll fly you to overseas and.
If you got time to spare, fly military air,
But
because
you can-
we spent 3 days in Dover, not Dover, but Andrews Air Force Base, waiting for an aircraft to come from there back to Seattle, Washington, and so we've,
Well,
where they brought those prisoners from Korea in the other day, that they just repatriated from North Korea, basically, where the cameras were shooting out that direction, we stayed in the building right there, the hangar, or the hangar, but the VIP lounge and everything, and looked out the window and was actually there when they were bringing home one of the young man that was killed, the Special Forces soldier that was killed in Nigeria, that ambush one that it was called on. They repatriated his remains, and we were there when his family was there to go out and receive him home and everything. So a lot of, you get a chance, you see a lot of neat things sometimes, some of these places, and a lot of unusual or just everyday life.
and then when we came back, it was just how many people on that plane?
We're flying on a C-7, and basically that's a very large, you probably put 2 or 3 M1 tanks inside of it. There were 7 of us on board. You know.
Just our baggage was there, and then the pilots called us up. We could sit up there and look and see everything, and it was really neat. Like I say, there's some, waiting sometimes you have to do, but, it worked out, so.
It's kind of neat to talk with younger military people. They see us as old fogies and everything, and everything. You get in there and go up and talk to the pilots and everything, and they say, well, you understand this, and yes, yes, yes. And then they get to talking and ask what you've flown, you tell them and everything. And then the conversation always comes down to how long you've been flying, and you tell them, and they'll say, well, we've got, on active duty, they maybe have 5,000 to 6,000 hours of flying time. And you tell them, and a guy asked me on the last flight home, and I said, well, I've got over 10,000 hours in one type aircraft, and so, immediately it kind of sets a tone. Not I'm better than you are, but yeah, I am.
So anybody ready to sign up?
Or you had enough of this?
Yeah.
Well, we
It
got a little
really
short
is.
of time, we're down to less.
Yeah, we have what, like probably 10 minutes before we need.
Yeah, let's give a couple more questions for David, have some more.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a few questions.
Okay.
So, one of the questions is, can you tell us a little bit more about the Tet Offense from your perspective?
The Tet Offensive in 1968, Tet's every year, okay? That is the Vietnamese New Year, okay? So it's like saying we had it's not just that one time. Tet Offensive in 1968 was, there was going to be an armistice or truce for a period of time. No fighting was supposed to go on in country. That was to allow everybody to, because it's the new year and we'll let families get together, soldiers could go home, and nobody was going to be doing any contact or any fighting. The North Vietnamese decided that they were going to have a sneak attack, okay? And instead of just being in one place, it was concentrated throughout the entire country. There were 100 villages and or cities attacked all at the same time. The concept or thought of by the North was that if once that came in and happened, the South would uprise and overthrow the government, and they would push the U.S., cause us to have to back out and leave. It was going to be another major defeat for the South and the U.S., just like the French at Dien Bien Phu. So all this took place. If you saw it on the news at home, you would say, my gosh, we just lost the war. Yes, on day one when it happened, all this is going on. I remember flying out that morning and something was going on and we're getting shot at for no reason. You know, in an area which you would consider totally safe. In other words, we're not in the bad guy land. So this was all happening. Within 3 days, technically, the whole operation had been stymied and the Vietnamese were on the run, North Vietnamese. When the Tet Offensive, technically that whole fight was over, VC in the south was decimated. The North Vietnamese army was all but decimated. And it took nearly 3 years before the North could stage any kind of major conflicts. The 1969 Easter Offensive and 70 Easter Offensive that took place was before. It took all that time for them to reconstitute enough of a military. We didn't lose the war over there, or the fights. We basically, I was involved in retaking the Citadel, the Way Citadel. We fought our way back down. The first couple days of that fight was pretty nasty. Then we were running into small pockets, company size and battalion size elements that were trapped, and the fights get pretty nasty. But within, like I say, we would catch them running down the road in large numbers, in formations, trying to get away, go back, and they were being decimated. So it looked a lot worse. It was bad, but it looked a lot worse if you just see snippets of it on television and you see something happening, and it's however it's portrayed. You can look at it and say, man, we must be getting our backside kicked and we need to be out of there. And by this time, basically the North, General Chapp later on in his book indicated that when he didn't want to fight the Tet Offensive in '68. Powers to be in North Vietnam said, yes, we were going to have this fight, so he orchestrated that, put it together. They were pretty well decimated. They didn't win the battle. They won a political victory here at home by the press and the feelings that the people we had had enough of the war. It was the first war we ever fought where every night on television you could see what was going on or see snippets of a conflict. There's nothing, we fought the war the wrong way. The soldiers were never released and said, go fight. We go out and take a hill, walk off that hill 3 days later, and 2 weeks or a month later, go retake that hill. That's not the way to fight. You gotta have a plan, and the borders were just that, borders. We couldn't cross the border chasing the bad guy. So if they got across the Cambodian or Laotian border or the North Vietnam border, we had to stop. We couldn't even shoot at them across the line. We did that though, because they shoot at us, so turnabout's fair play. But the Tet Offensive was a total surprise to us. I was involved in a contact in October of '67. We captured 27 pounds of documents talking about the Quay San Valley Offensive and elements of the Tet Offensive in '68. The hierarchy could not believe, or did not want to believe, that that was really what it meant. It must have been something else. And pretty much when the offensive started, the things that we had captured proved to be were right. Yes, it was a total surprise, but it was done through, you and I called timeout during a football game, and the other team picks the ball up and runs down, says it's touchdown, Wait a minute, that's not fair. We all said we're going to take a timeout.
And one more quick question. There was some not good treatment towards active military during the, or after the Vietnam War on coming home? Did you receive any harsh treatment from the public?
It took place, yes, okay? Like I always told Carol, anyway, if you act like, you know, there's bad places to go in town, or any town, but if you act like you got a purpose and don't walk hunkered up like this, you may not get affected. I know young men that were called, you know, spit on and called baby killer and stuff like that, and it never personally happened to me. You know, maybe it was because I didn't give a dang and I'd look you right in the eye and tell you. You know, don't mess with me, because it's like a guy was sitting on the hood of my car one time at Fort Knox, one of the reasons I asked to leave. And I told him to get off my car, brand new 442 Oldsmobile. And he said, well, she was sitting on it. I said, yeah, she and I are going together. You get the hell off my car, you know? And he jumped off. He says, you know, I'm a black belt. I know karate. And I reached in the car and I pulled out Thunder. And I said, and I carry a .357 Magnum. You know? I said, there's two things different between you and I. I've popped a cap on somebody before, so I won't hesitate. You've never done it. You will hesitate. I have the edge. So, some of those things are the reason I got sent back.
You might still need one back there.
So, I'm gonna ask the last question
One
here.
quick one, yeah. we can
Yeah,
get some pictures.
so what do you think is the biggest takeaway that we should take as, you know, younger people on your service and on what you've taken from it?
On honor service?
Just however, whatever you think that we should take away.
Well, the thing about it is, you know, any one of these wars or issues that you get into, you're not gonna be able to change a lot of that stuff, you know, if that's what's gonna happen. You're just gonna have to figure out, you know, they don't have a draft now, but they might have to have a draft. And, you know, I personally think that it's a good experience. I mean, sometimes you don't end up coming back alive. I mean, I know that's the worst thing that could happen, but, you know, it really makes you grow up and think about, you know, you get a better perspective. A lot of times people can make comments about something, a war or something, if they haven't been part of it, if they haven't studied it, if they haven't maybe gone into the military. We'll always need a military, but we have a son who has like 21 years now, and it's hard to believe that he'll be getting out, and he said that was the best experience he's ever had, and now he's going to go on and try to do something different, and I think that he's all set and ready to go. So, I mean, to me it was worthwhile to be able to serve. Not that I wanted any war to happen, but it was a good experience, and you got, you know, like even with the nursing experience, when you're in Vietnam, you could do anything pretty much. You could, you know, you could hang the blood up, you could, you know, do a lot of stuff. But yeah, make your own decisions. And when you go back, when I was in Germany working there, they, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. We don't do that here. You know, oh, okay. So, you know, you have that different type of experience in the combat zone, and you have the doctors that will support you if you need to do it, whatever it takes. And so that was one of the things that I thought was, you know, it was a good thing for me to be able to do that. So, and for you?
I think what you need to take away from some of this, and you've had other veterans in here speaking to you about their times. And, you know, there are good things and bad things no matter what you're doing. The further away you get from it, the more you forget about the bad times and think about even things that happened during conflict. Sometimes look back on it, seems kind of funny. or you only see the good side of it, of everything. The only thing I would say to take away from all this, one of the things is the fact that everybody, no matter where you are in life, is doing what they think is right, okay? And you can't, the people that are in the service, they're doing a job. It's a profession, whether you're in for 2 years or you're in for 30 years. You know, and you go off to do something else. Respect those that have gone. We don't pick what we get to do necessarily. But look back, and those that have served, it's less than 1%. Basically, it's about 1 to 3% of the population has ever served for the country. Okay, that means there's 97 to 99% of us that have enjoyed what we have in this country because of that service. You know, and a strong defense means you may not get run over. Okay, you may go out and do something else, you know, in a doctor, a pharmacist, you know, whatever it may be, you're gonna have something in life. Respect the other person for what they're doing, okay?
We got a quick picture here, quick before we go.
Yep.
Brown. How are you?
Nothing new.
So just so you know, these two gentlemen here, Ethan and Jaime will be asking the
But
question.
call me my
All right,
brother.
super.
Yeah, so I think how we're gonna do this is that we're gonna ask the question and get each of your answers, then we'll move on to the next question. So, do you wanna start with the first question, or shall I?
When did you guys enlist?
I went in the Army in 1968. I had just graduated from nursing school, and they had some people come down and talk to us about different career fields, and recruiters came from the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. The Air Force nurse and Navy nurse had gray hair, and it sounded like it wasn't going to be very exciting. But the Army nurse just came back from Vietnam and said, I was there for 1 year and I had 10 years of nursing experience, so I said, that's what I'm going to do. So the next thing I know, that was Friday. Monday, I was at the recruiting office in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, got sworn in, and went to Fort Knox, Kentucky after that, so after I graduated. So that's how it started for me.
I went in the Army in 1966. I was supposed to go in the Navy. They stopped the 2-year college flight program, and I wound up taking the Army exams for flight school and was accepted. So in 1966, I went to Fort Walters, Texas, after basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and then on to Fort Rucker, and wound up in Vietnam in 1967, March of 1967, and was there through some of the more exciting periods, like the Tet Offensive of 1968, and then came home.
During kind of those early stages when you were first getting into it, what did it all feel like to you? Where was your head at?
Well, they sent me down to Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and they were going to make us into soldiers. And so every day at 5 o'clock, we were on a bus out to the parade field and doing all our precision marching and learning how to salute and do all those things that, you need to, all those areas you need to work with and become really ingrained in the military. So the only problem that I had was that we were not on a base. They really were needing medical people, and so they put us in a hotel. And so we were there for 6 weeks in a hotel, which was kind of difficult because you didn't have transportation or anything like that. The bus picked you up each day and brought you back. Then you were on your own. So I felt that was something I wish we would have had, more bonding that way. Then after that, I got sent to Fort Knox.
Okay.
Basically, going through basic training, it's just like they're breaking the apron strings. And what they're doing is sending you there and getting you to understand that there's something bigger than you, and that's being, the entire group. It's like being on a sports team. When you first start playing, everyone's got ideas of how they're going to do and everything. Pretty soon the coaches take control and you start doing what they want, and then eventually you become a team. So initially at first it could be a little confusing, but it's also the excitement of something new every day, or whether it be exciting or just the mundane day-to-day, got to get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, get ready and go out, rain or shine, and line up in formation and go on. When I got to flight school, then it became a lot more of the things I was planning on doing or wanting to do, and the excitement there. The most exciting thing was on day one when you walked in to see your flight instructor, and there was 4 of us sitting at the table with him, and he tells us, he says, unless somebody else flunks out an extra person, one of you will be gone prior to the end of this phase. Unless somebody else flunks out an extra person, another one of you will be gone by the end of the second phase. So it kind of strikes home that this is not, they mean it. And realizing that now I'm in the Army, and if I'm not going to flight school, I'm going to go do something that they want, not what necessarily I want. And so the realization kind of comes home, and you start paying attention in class.
Where were you guys living at the time?
With time for what?
Like before you
Okay.
enlisted?
Oh, okay, I was born and raised in Pennsylvania and was living there until I joined the Army. And we were,
I grew up, was born in Pensacola, Florida. My dad was in the Navy, so I grew up and down the West Coast and throughout the Pacific, Okinawa, Guam, Japan, in those areas. So when I went into the Army or joined, Battleground, Washington was where I graduated from high school. I spent, of course, 12 years going through school. I went to 12 different schools in those 12 years. My last 3 years, sophomore, junior, and senior year, I was in the same school. Until then, I had been in 11 different schools, so.
Yeah. Let me ask some questions since I've answered most of those already. Where were you guys stationed when you had gotten out of boot camp and I guess out of flight school for you?
well, initially I was at Fort Knox.
Mm-hmm.
And I was Kentucky, Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I was waiting, what I wanted to do, I only had 2 years' time to do what I wanted to do. And, you know, I really liked the military, so I thought, well, I was gonna stay in no matter what. But I wanted to go to Vietnam while things were still going on there, so I could get some good nursing experience. And so I talked with the people in Washington DC, and eventually I was able to go. And so I went to, that was like in 1968 1970 when I went to Vietnam. And was there for a year.
Coming out of flight school, Fort Rucker, Alabama, we knew immediately we were going to overseas. My platoon that I was in, all but 3 of them went to the 1st Cav Division together, and we all wound up there. The rest of my flight class wound up going to stateside assignments where they were forming up the new air Cav squadrons that were going to come overseas. I joined a unit in Vietnam in the 1st Cav Division, which was the 1st Squadron 9th Cav, 1st of the 9th. We wore the black Stetsons, and the division hated those cowboy hats, but John B. Stockton started them, so I went to Vietnam and joined through a friend of mine saying, oh, I had an instructor that was in this unit, we should join it. I think I slept through that part of the class when they were talking about the units in the 1st Cav Division when I was in flight school, and wasn't too sure what they did. I became a scout pilot within the organization. And the scout pilots, it's just like the Indian scouts for the Cav in those days. My job was to go out, hunt and find and engage contacts. From there, we came back to the States. Where I came back to the States, went to Fort Walters, Texas, where I taught flight again. Went on back up to Fort Knox, where Carol and I met, and I went through my officer advanced course up there, or basic course, because I'd been a warrant officer, so I was becoming a commissioned officer. And then stayed over to teach air Cav tactics. And then I got reassigned back to Vietnam. My old squadron commander, boss said I'm the only guy they sent back to Vietnam to keep him alive. I was a little crazy and wild in those days.
What were some of your most memorable experiences?
Well, while we were in Vietnam, we got married. And that was kind of interesting because, you know, most people didn't want to do that, or they were going to be away from family, but we thought, well, we'll be stationed together. That will be a good thing. Well, we went through the ceremony. We had our, in fact, I'm still in touch with the priest that married us. He's down in North Carolina. And did I say that right? Because he moved, because he was in Florida for a while. But it was this kind of a really neat ceremony with a small group of people that we served with. And then we thought, okay, we're going to have our words together. I was going to Fort Bliss, Texas, and Larry was going to Germany. And so there we were, trying to figure out, okay, who's going where and what would be the best assignment. So what we did is we ended up going to Germany after quite a bit of work and getting that solved, so.
I guess I did 2 tours in Vietnam. My first tour, most exciting stuff, I guess, might have been during learning what I was supposed to do in country. As a scout pilot, my job was, as I said, go find things. If we had U.S. units in contact, we would go support them, be called in, and our job would be then to help them break contact, or I would engage with the support of a gunship to go ahead and take out the enemy positions. If we found them out in the jungle somewhere, then it was free fire zones. And you determine how good you are, I guess, is if you survive it, and or there's always a pecking order within any organization, and body count became part of that pecking order. And then on my second tour, then we did the Tet Offensive in '68. Coming back in Vietnam, I guess the next time would have been, of course, Carol and I getting married, taking her out in the AO one time, and she gets to watch me get shot down. Another time is we spent, when we went into Cambodia, then we went into Laos, and so between the Tet Offensive of '68, Cambodia incursion, and the Laos Lam Son 719, 3 of the biggest operations in Vietnam, I was able to take part in and flew contact during that. So,
And survive.
yeah. I was shot down 9 times in Vietnam. And now shot down doesn't mean the aircraft gets shot up and you make it back to base. A real shoot down is somebody has to come get you. And so I managed to do that 9 times.
Did you get injured at all whenever you were shot down? Or?
Yes, I have some injuries. I have 4 Purple Hearts. And Purple Heart is due to an injury to enemy during conflict with the enemy. Okay, hostile action.
What were you flying when you? Well, what were some of the different aircraft you were flying, I suppose?
Okay, first tour I went over and initially got put into the lift platoon. I flew a UH-1 for about a month or so, and said, this is not as exciting as I would like it to be, young and dumb. So I volunteered to go into the Scouts. Scouts, we were flying an H-13. Everyone ever watched MASH on television?
Oh yeah.
That's an H-13 where the little bubble aircraft flying around and they bring it in. And I've had guys come up to it and say, is that plexiglass on there, is that bulletproof? And I had an observer say, yeah, get inside, I'll show you. So, so we flew H-13s, then we got the OH-6, which is the Hughes 5, what you see is a Hughes 500 today running around. Looks like a little Easter egg. The H-13 is a bubble with a rector set tail structure on it. So we flew those, and depending on the configuration of the aircraft, in an H-13 I rode with an observer, we flew side by side, and he carried an M60 machine gun, and I did the flying, and I could shoot my skid guns if I wanted to, if I had them on there. Don and I were both small guys, so we loaded up with extra ammunition and other things to never pass up a rearm or refuel point, because you never know when you're gonna need one or the other. Only time you got too much fuel is when the aircraft's on fire. Second tour I went back, I was supposed to be a crane IP, a Sky Crane CH-54, which if you look around, they use those today fighting wildland flyers. It's a big, looks like a flying praying mantis with a belly tank on it. I went back as a 54 IP, which is instructor pilot. Wound up because of knowing people at Fort Knox and some of the problems I had been in at Fort Knox. they decided I owed them some payback. And they put me back in a cab unit because it was bringing in the OH-58, Charlie 3rd the 17th as a test. And I was assigned directly there from replacement center direct to a platoon in a squadron. So on day one, when the squadron commander met me, he was not happy. Who the heck did I know, and who thought, why I thought I was so important, not to come to a squadron, not to come to a troop, but to go direct to a platoon. When I told him this, the regimental or the brigade 12th group commander assigned me there, that's the end of the subject. He told me to get out of his office, he didn't want to see me again, go do my job.
For you though, we haven't actually gotten a chance to interview a nurse before, so can you give us kind of an insight to how things went within the hospitals or treatment centers or?
Okay, I worked in the pre-op and recovery ward, and before, when the patients came off the helicopter, people from the emergency room would be out there to bring them in through the emergency room. And they would get started with IVs and sometimes blood if they needed it. And then the next step, they'd come up to us, and we would, this is kind of, these soldiers recovered with Agent Orange. We didn't wear gloves. No one said that you had to wear gloves, and never talked about it. And we were taking clothes off of the soldiers, and best we could, because that's pretty much all you could do. We tried to wash them up before they went into surgery, the best we could with a small basin of water. And they would go into surgery. Sometimes they would be there for 10 hours, sometimes longer. Some of the surgical procedures they were doing it. And then they would come back and we would recover them. And then they would be sent on depending on their wounds. Like for instance, if they had leg injuries, we'd send them to orthopedics. If they had other types of, chest injuries and things. So they would go off to the different wards. I have a picture of the hospital area. You can pass it around with us and you can look at it. But they, sometimes, like I say, we were there sometimes the whole 24 hours. Sometimes they would, like I say, the patients would need whole blood because the blood that we had was not fresh enough. And so they would go over to the, when the aircraft came in, brought new soldiers from the United States, they'd bring them over and they'd get the whole blood from them so we could transfuse our patients. Huh?
The replacement center is right.
Yeah, and then we had, then there was the issue of, well, the other thing we did is we took care of Vietnam soldiers, Thai, Koreans, let's see, Australians were there. Because like I say, ours was a specialty for the head injuries. And so it was kind of a tough assignment because a lot of those guys didn't make it. Some of them did. So, yeah, where I said we had the VCA, VC and the NBA were there too. I mean, we had the enemy. And most of the time it didn't bother too many people, but if a soldier was maybe a little bit more awake, we had some of them that really got excited about that. They wanted to make sure those soldiers were out, those soldiers, enemy soldiers were out there. They had their own ward, and they would go over there, and there would be a nurse over there assigned to them to take care of them and hopefully get them back. But babies were delivered there. They would have the BC, or not the BC, but the civilians would come in and they have a baby. And, sometimes they were out in a village and they would be brought in and we would do that too. So it was anything. And sometimes you're, like I say, there 24 hours. Try to get a rest and then come back again. So it was a lot of things to do.
Shifts, how long were shifts?
12 hour shifts, and then like I say, if there was long, we stayed until the work was done. Because there was only, really at night, there was only 2 nurses and some medics. During the day, there was more because they were doing surgery. Then over at night, hopefully things would calm down unless you had a whole bunch of people brought in at night. So then everybody would get activated and back into the ward.
Yeah, so obviously you guys have quite a bit of medals. What were they for? Like, what were they awarded for?
Go ahead and explain.
Oh, okay. I think these are,
It's yours.
these are mine.
That's
Legion of Merit, this is the Bronze Star. This is the, yeah. This is the Bronze Star. And this one is Army Commendation and the Meritorious. They're very nice cases, very nice ribbons, but you know, there's a lot of collection of them. And then you have yours over here.
This is the Silver Star. I have 3 awards of the Silver Star. Silver Star is 3rd highest medal you can receive, combat. Bronze Star, I've got just the 1 Bronze Star. 4 Distinguished Flying Crosses. Cases are getting old. The Air Medal with 2 awards for valor and 64 awards for 25 hours each of combat flying. The Legion of Merit and the Meritorious Service ribbon. I've got a total of 130 some odd awards. Carol has a total of about 18 or 20, and the only difference is because I was in a combat type unit and we were involved in things that got awards, and sometimes the people in what we call support units didn't always get the recognition or the awards because they just kind of looked at it like that's just their job, and they didn't necessarily. But I also got awards that like the Air Medal, just because I went out every day and after 25 hours you get an Air Medal. You know, so every 20 or 50 hours of non-combat flying. So, you know, those add up after a while for just being there, so to speak. Plus we each have our badges, which we call I Was There awards, and the Alive at 65, you know, kind of things, the National Defense Ribbon and some of these. We found that when we came home from Vietnam, I noticed really initially the first time, especially after the second tour, we had a lot of young NCOs and young officers that had 3, 4, 5 rows of ribbons. And the ribbons are like the medals, only you just wear it on their uniform the other way, and it tells your history. And then you had in between NCOs or higher level NCOs and officers that had never been in combat, and they didn't have anything to wear other than the National Defense Ribbon or a couple other things. So they started developing I Was There ribbons, as we called it. You know, professional development, overseas training, you know, whatever. So you get young NCOs standing there. An NCO is a young enlisted man that's going to be basically, he's, as an officer, I give the direction, the senior NCO says, okay, divide it up, you're gonna take care of this, you're gonna do this, you're gonna take care of that. That's generally the junior NCO, E5, E6 type grades, and they're out there running the rest of the crews. And the senior NCOs will supervise them, and the officer sits in the, you know, back in the office and sips on some coffee or something. Yeah. Well, that's why the enlisted always say, I work for a living, don't call me sir, you know. But really, it's kind of one of those things. But once they know you're doing your part, they don't have a problem. So those are the ribbons and awards that we have received over the years. Carol spent 31 years in the Army, in the military, and I didn't stay long, I spent 30. So she's senior as far as time, you know. We both retired as '06 colonels, full colonels. And of course, she's the only colonel in the military that had her own colonel aide-de-camp. An aide-de-camp is somebody carries your briefcase around, sees that everything's done, and do all that stuff.
That you?
That was me.
Do you have any stories attached to any of the medals in particular, though? Anything that's like really memorable,
I
or?
think I have one.
With your Bronze Star, you get, you know, go ahead.
Well, I think that, you know, I mean, the reason I'm sure I got it was because of all the work we did at the hospital. I mean, it wasn't, there were times that, you know, I know that a lot of the nurses would go back to the rooms and cry and that some of the people couldn't be saved. And, you know, you sat with the soldiers and sometimes, you know, I mean, I sat with a dying soldier and it was like, you know, he just knew, you know, he wanted someone to get in touch with her, his mother, and, you know, just to let her know that, you know, he was just in bad shape and weren't sure that he was gonna make it. He didn't make it. And it was one of those things that you just have to move on with them because they keep coming in. And, you know, I think that the ward that I was on, they really did good work. They did everything, anything that they could. The other, like I say, when they were the expectant, where they were expected to live, we would bring them back. I mean, if we had time, we would get them back in, get them to surgery. And a lot of times those guys survived. It was just a matter of time. And that we had to spend. And so I think that, and then the first time I went back to DC when they had, the Vietnam Wall was put up, there were soldiers there that some of them were really disfigured. And you look at them and you say, you know, how did they do when they got back? And he said, hey, I have a wife, I have a family now. Even though I look like this, I'm happy, I'm alive. And so, you know, there were those, that was good, a good story. And you know, it was glad to see that they were there. And we just had a dedication of the helicopter monument. There were a lot of people there, and they were just excited to be there and glad. And some of them were crippled and came, but they were there, and they keep on moving. So.
The Silver Stars, two of the three were given to me by ground units, people I was supporting for contact that were basically, a unit was in heavy contact, people were cut off, and then as the scout would get between the bad guys and the good guys and take the enemy positions out. The unit gave me a Silver Star. We were shot down. In fact, the time that Carol watched it happen on my second tour, we were shot down. Both crew members were wounded. We had gone out just outside the base and were supporting a unit that was in contact, an ARVN unit, Vietnamese unit, with American advisors with them. And that's the reason we went down to help them. And immediately in the area, I was shot down and fell through the jungle canopy, went into the jungle. And basically the aircraft was lost. They couldn't see us. And because we'd hit the top of the canopy and then slid down, hit the second level of the canopy and slid across further and then fell into a bunch of bamboo. The kid sitting in the seat next to me had taken a round through both legs, basically couldn't walk, was stuck in the seat. My crew chief in the back had been shot and taken 2 rounds in his back, but he was still able to get around. So he was able to get out of the back of the aircraft. The kid next to me, the observer, we got him out on my side of the aircraft and down, and then set up a perimeter while they were trying to find us and to keep the enemy from overrunning our position. The aircraft, they came down to try to extract us once they found us. And they found us because I was on my emergency radio and told them that somebody had just passed over the top of us, so he knew about where we were. We were about 30, 40 yards from where we had hit the top of the canopy, so we weren't where they thought. And actually, they didn't think we were gonna make it because the report was that we had gone in upside down. We had rolled over when we hit the top of the trees. So we got the 2 kids out, and the crew chief, and had been hit in the back twice, he cleared his gun and got it ready to fire. And the other kid, you know, basically he was in really bad pain, even though he'd only been hit once, but round went through, I think it broke both femurs. And so he was, it was hard to even move him around. They brought in a aircraft over the top of us, and the bad guys didn't try to overrun us. They started lobbing mortars and getting airbursts, trying to knock down the other aircraft. I got both of the kids on the ladder, and at that point we decided to evacuate the aircraft and I'd stay on the ground. They got them, Carol was listening to it all on the radio, and everyone was saying, oh, well, don't worry about it, it's no big deal. And because she'd flown out that morning in the front seat of a Cobra. She wasn't supposed to be out there in the first place, but I'd taken her along because she'd been complaining about not seeing anything. And I wanted to tell her how boring it was for us out there. And so early that morning, about the 3rd mission that morning, this all happened. And she's hearing it on the radio, and the RTO, the radio telephone operator, the young man, young Spec 4 that was running the radio where we were all sitting around, when the scramble happened, you know, everyone, what we call a scramble, birds down, everybody, all the aircraft take off. All the gunships and scouts take off and go to that point of contact where that aircraft's down, because one, we're trying to secure the aircraft, secure the crew, and then do any engagements, whatever caused them to go down. Generally it's because they've been shot down, and sometimes you have a maintenance issue and you've gone down, but most times it's because of being shot down. So, and then they get some lift birds up, because the lift birds are there for one reason, to extract the crew as soon as possible, to get them out. The others, the guns and scouts, are there to recon the area and shoot it up and keep it clear. Of course, they were telling Carol, don't worry about it, it's not the gunship, you know. Finally, she told the young man that, well, she was, because they all knew she was dating somebody, one of the pilots. And finally she said, well, I'm actually dating the scout pilot that's down, you know. And at that point, the squadron commander, or the troop commander, came down, picked Carol up, and took her out to see if they could find where we were at. And then the report starts coming in that they've got the crew members out, and we all went by a call sign. My call sign at that time was Charlie Horse 19. So if they were talking, they wouldn't call us by name on the radio for security. They would just say, we have 19 in sight. Or, so they were giving, the report was 19 Charlie and 19 Oscar have been recovered. 19 is on the ground. You know, so it's that way they don't give out a name, but we all know who they're talking about. Because most of us, during that whole time, you get to know everyone. You either have a nickname or you go by your call sign. You know, most people, that's all you used amongst ourselves. So they came to get us. They couldn't find us. They went to the different hospitals close by. My crew members were there. I wasn't. So the old man, the troop commander, takes Carol back to Zeon, where we were based out of, because he's got to get fuel and try to find out if there's any reports. And I and 2 other pilots come walking out of the ops building, because I'm going to go back out. I'm going to get even. I'm going to get me another aircraft and go get even. And Carol said, we're through. That's the end of us being together. So 3 weeks.
Here we are.
Yeah, 3 weeks later she came back and said, all's forgiven. So Silver Star. Way I got picked up later was, gathered up the equipment. One of the guns I asked, told him we needed to get out of there. He said, follow this direction. He gave me a heading as he passed over, could see up through the top. He said, outline this direction, about 150 yards, there is a clearing, we can get an aircraft in there. So I was carrying the 2 M60 machine guns, my chest protector, my flight helmet on, my AK-47 and my .357 Magnum, and I was going through the jungle. And they have out there what they call wait-a-minute vines. In a wait-a-minute vine, if you talk to the infantry guys, that's just what they are. You get tangled up in it, it takes you a minute to get untangled. They didn't stop me at all. I was moving. There's nothing gonna slow me down going through here. And I got out to the clearing, and the bad guys followed me, you know. And I got out in the middle of the clearing, and I got dropped down on my knees and kind of laid over because I was tired now. And, you know, the adrenaline going only lasts for so long. So I was tired there for a minute, taking a breath, and one of the other lift birds coming over thought I'd been hit, and the ladder bird came over and dropped a ladder, and there was a crew chief, he probably, and that's about a 75-foot ladder, he probably hit about 3 rungs on the way down, because he was coming down to get a hold of me. And I sat up, and the ladder was right there next to me, and I'm trying to get on it, and so the other observer, kid in the aircraft said, oh, they're on the ladder, started to take off. Well, I'm still trying to hang the 60s on the ladder, and this kid's next to me, big, pretty husky young man, and he's got 1 foot in the ladder and 1 arm hanging onto it like this, and the aircraft starts to take off, and I'm not on it. So he reaches back and grabs me right here by my chest protector, and he's about to choke me to death because it's pulling up like this. I'm trying to get on the ladder, get on, and we're about 75, 80 feet in the air by now before I got a hold of it, and the bullets are going by us, and the lift birds are coming in, and I'm thinking our lift birds or door gunners are shooting up the area. Well, they weren't shooting. It was the bad guys who were waiting for us, that lift bird to land and start shooting us up. But because of what happened, the way it went, and it happened so fast, they started shooting at us at the last second when they realized, last minute when they realized we were getting away and they weren't going to be able to shoot us down. So I'm hollering at the lift birds. Of course, they can't hear you, you know, but in your mind you think you're doing these great things, you know. So I'm hollering, knock it off, you're shooting at us. And then when we get back in, we find out they were talking. Well, we didn't do any shooting. And yeah, we ran into the guys, they were running away when we got there, so then they recovered the aircraft the next day, were able to get it out. So that's a couple of those.
During service, what was the food like?
I thought it was great. At the hospital, it always was. They had good food. And then if you worked the late night shift, they'd have a midnight breakfast, you could go down and have anything you wanted. And it would be, I thought it was good. I mean, we took our medication for malaria. They always had them there waiting for us. But I thought it was good. And in the hospital, it's always better. Sometimes when you're out where these guys were, they didn't get the food wasn't the greatest. And with the hospital, I mean, we had to serve nutritious food. I mean, it was part of the healing process, and so, you know, we always had good food.
Depending on where we were at, my first tour, I lived in a tent the whole time. You know, of course, that's better than a lot of the infantrymen that were out in the jungles. You know, they lived, you know, if you saw the, you know, Forrest Gump, basically, you know, they wandered around. They go out for 20 to 30 days at a time. They come back in, you know, they've been sleeping in wherever they could every night, basically, with a poncho liner, and that's it. They didn't have a cot and everything. So even in the tent, I had a cot to sleep on, and it was a little better to go home. We called that our home. Of course, our tent moved. I moved 9 times on my first tour in Vietnam in the 12 months we were there. and some, you know, those moves. There were times when they would send a team, 2 aircraft, to go work for somebody else for a while. And depending on what it was like when we got to that location, maybe we slept in or under the aircraft at night. As far as food, the mess team tried to do pretty good with what the rations that they had, depending on your mission. I didn't generally eat breakfast because I like to fly the first light mission. That's when the bad guys are out walking, they're still walking around. I would get lunch maybe late because I like to fly at noon, and I like to fly the last light mission because that's when things gotta happen. The GI is very routine in what we do. You know, we get up in the morning and we go to chow. And we get in the field at a certain time. Or we're in the field and we have chow and then we get out to do our patrols at a certain time. You know, about 7, 8 o'clock you start moving around as far as on patrol. Well, the bad guys know that. So they have a routine too. They try to be in their bed down area by 7, 8 o'clock in the morning because they're not gonna be moving in the open areas. Now, they're gonna move around, just like if you're a deer hunter, you know the deer move around all day long too. But there are certain times they're out feeding, you know, and they'll move around a lot at night and on you, and they've got their routine that they play. Well, same thing with the bad guy. And they know about noon, the U.S. soldier stops to eat chow. So they'll get up on the road to walk at that time because they know you're bedded down, or you're at this one spot. Well, it's great hunting in the morning because they're getting ready to find their ground, you know, they're going to ground, and they've got their breakfast or dinner fires going. So you can smell, believe it or not, you can smell the food in the cooking fires. You know how when you drive by somebody's got a fire going, you can smell the smoke? The same thing for scouting, it's all that same stuff. So at noontime, they want them sort of working their way through bad parts of ground. If there's a road or a good trail, they'll get on it and cut a chogie. They're moving right along because they know the GI isn't moving unless you got an ambush set up for them. And the same thing at night, they know that evening is starting to wind down, the soldiers are starting to bed down, and they're gonna start using the trails again. And so those are 3 good hunting times. And so if you occupy those hunting times, you're gonna be more times than not effective. So we ate well, they ate well when they could, and but you can smell rice and fish cooking. They didn't get a lot of fish in the jungles, they got a lot of rice though. And you can smell that when it cooks up. They use sugar to sweeten stuff in cooking. And if you've ever done any cooking or been around somebody that's heated sugar up in a skillet, you know, it puts out a hell of a smell, you know, and quite an aroma. It's good to cook with, but it sure puts up a stink, you know, so.
How do you guys stay in touch with your family, especially with getting married overseas? I'd imagine that there were some reactions there.
We wrote letters, but then the cassettes came out, and it was like a big deal, like, wow, we get this cassette player, you make a tape and you send it to you give them a cassette player, send it to them. And so we kept in touch that way, and that was kind of a good thing. And we have some of yours, which were reel to reel, and mine with the cassette. And so it was good because you could at least hear your family and tell you what was happening back in the States and what they were cooking and what they were doing. And you tell them pretty much, it was kind of hard sometimes to tell them what you were doing. You just try to think of the good things. That you got to order something from this year's robot catalog so you could pick your room up a little bit because it was just real small. And you try to get something to make it livable. And so that was pretty much how we communicated towards the end with those cassettes. I thought it was good to do that.
My first tour, basically, you know, you're communicating at home. You just write letters. I did go over with a small reel-to-reel tape recorder, and would send tapes home. My folks would then send one back of what's going on at home and everything, and that was the great means of communication. Second tour, because Carol and I were basically over there together, we were within 20 miles of each other early on when I was at camp at Zion, and she was at Long Bend there. Then my unit was sent north, and we were up on the DMZ again, and we were up there in the operation. So Carol and I didn't normally write back and forth to each other because we'd have landlines. You know, everyone knows what a landline is. That's a telephone, and not your walk-around guy that you got today.
Too bad we
Your
didn't
cell
have
phone.
those, huh?
We didn't have cell phones. So, but we swung a deal and tapped off of the landline that was hooked in the hooch Carol lived in, and I'd got her a phone and put in her room so she could pick it up and talk from her room. It was basically like two phones in the house. You didn't have two different lines, so if she was on the phone, somebody else couldn't use the phone. And I'd go up to operations and give her a call. We did our planning for our wedding over the landline. Carol had to put a lot of the work together, but we did a lot of the planning. Now, the landline, I didn't pick it up and dial a number and it rang direct to her. I pick up the phone, crank a handle, and tell them, say, Black Hawk switch, you know, give me Red Devil switch. And they'd say, okay, and then start patching you down the line to through these different switches. And these switches are phone operators, basically like you've seen old pictures where they had the cables they plugged in like this, you know, and somebody's got a headset on and they're, you know, pick up the phone and tell them to dial somebody for you. Well, they go down through these patches to get there. Sometimes I get a direct patch from Quantree to Da Nang right down to Long Bend into the 24th and her number. Sometimes it would go from where I was at Quantree to Da Nang to Pleiku, Quinyon to, you know, and wander its way down country depending on which lines were working at the time. And so you get them on the phone and it'd be like we're talking back and forth. Sometimes you can't hear what the other person is saying. So while we're doing the planning and everything, and you'd get a switch operator, they'd come on periodically to listen. And if they knew we had a bad line, they'd stay on the line with us. And they would say, he said he loves you. And then 2 or 3 of them would pass that along, and then they'd come back up, she said she loves you too. You know? And then we had about a dozen different phone operators that, because we've started these calls pretty regularly for a while, that pretty much, once we got on the line, they made sure we had a clear line and checked back, and or if it was a bad line, they would, you know, hey, we're here to help you, you know? And so they would, and they got to the point that they knew about the wedding and all the things that were going on and everything else, and you know, so, can we come to the wedding too? Yep, you just come on down, you know? So we had a good time.
Well, we did go back to Vietnam in 2005, and that was our 35th wedding anniversary at the time, and we decided that we would ask our best man and his wife and a couple other people to go with us. And they said, oh no, we're not going back to Vietnam, we've been there already, twice, you know, the guys. And, but anyway, it turned out really well. We went back and got to see the whole country and how things have improved, and we went all the way to Hanoi, and the people, they really were nice. And I think it was a good thing for us to feel that way, that they were, you know, they had us separate too. Huh? Oh yeah, we renewed our wedding vows there, and we went down to see the priest at the Immaculate Conception church. He says, you can't come here and just get married. I said, Father, here's our marriage certificate in Vietnamese. We had to go to the Vietnamese government and have that signed. We had to have the chaplain sign in the hospital at the 24th. And he then was like, whoa, wow. So everybody was excited, and you know, they were